jumping right in here. Welcome to the Contributor Strategy, Contributor Growth Working Group for January 26, 2023. Just a reminder that this meeting is recorded. It will be posted on YouTube, and that we follow the CNCF Code of Conduct as well. It applies to this. Yeah. Let's jump in. I think, we have some new people. Maybe we could just go around real quick and do introductions so everyone knows who is who. My name is Carolyn Van Slyke. I am one of the leads for the Contributor Growth Working Group, and I work at Microsoft. Nate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nate Waddington. I am a developer advocate at the CNCF, and in that role, I focus on technical documentation, helping projects write and organize their documents, and I also help run the mentorship program. Who can I toss it to? Sorry, I don't see. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Dawn Foster. I lead the open source community strategy function for VMware's open source program office. I'm one of the co-chairs of this tag. I'm also involved in a lot of discussions about open source project health and metrics. So I dabble in lots of things, and I'm based just outside of London. Fasila.
Hi, myself, Fasila. I currently work in Ericsson, Germany, and also working on prioritizing Ericsson's requirements in the open source communities, primarily Istio. So I'm in the steering committee of Istio. That's it about me.
I can go. I'm Rian. I'm in South Africa, working with II in New Zealand, mostly on Kubernetes conformance and infrastructure, and and helping out on CNCF community work. Josh, sorry to you.
Hey there, Josh Burkus, co-chair of Tag Contributor Strategy. Work for Red Hat in the open source practice office. And is that everybody? I think that's everybody. Yeah.
Jay's on the call too.
Oh, okay.
Kia ora, I'm Jay. I'm co-chair for the mentoring working group. I work with II in New Zealand as a community manager, just outreach with the local community. Nice to connect.
Great, thank you, everyone. The first topic on our agenda, we have two things. So this may get, by May, I mean, most likely we will be time boxing. So I'm apologizing right up front for that, but I'm hoping we can talk about both. But first we have Fasila here with a survey for CNCF about women in the CNCF. I'll open the document. I don't think that everyone has access to it. I think Amy was noting that it's not publicly shared at the moment, but I have access. So we'll look at it here together. But Fasila, I was hoping first you could provide more background on what inspired putting together this survey and what your goals are, and maybe if this was coming from the CNCF, from your employer, or things like that.
Okay. So I'm currently doing a survey internally about women and technology within Ericsson. And we also wanted to do one step above and do a similar research about women in technology in open source projects. So since I am into Istio, and now Istio is in the process of CNCF migration, and we are almost done with such things. So I felt, since I know people there, it's easier for me to do the research under the scope of CNCF women. That's how I started with it. In fact, I had a plan to see if it is possible to share some of the findings in the upcoming KubeCon Europe, because anyways, I'm staying close to Amsterdam and I was planning to travel there. But then since we have a lot of questions and then we have to rework on the questions and all in the survey, I finally decided that it's better not to do it. So yesterday only I just withdrew the submission, saying I would need some more time to finish the preparation, because it take more time to do the survey and in-person interviews, and then finally come up with a proper way forward. So that was there in the plan. For me personally, it's like I'm basically from India. So I moved here to Germany last year only. So coming from a background like in India and working in open source, and at least, and not to a very big level, but at least to the steering committee of Istio itself was like a big journey. So I personally know many of the hurdles for women to get into this place. So I felt, in case if I can do a survey and reach out to more people in the space and then get feedback from them and see if there is something which we can improve in the overall process at a CNCF level. Maybe if I can help at least some people, it would be nice. So that's why I thought of expanding my internal work to the open source space and do a bit more on top of it. But of course, when I was trying to write down the questions, I felt I was not so sure whether I can simply put women in CNCF and do a survey. And that's why I tried to make it a bit neutral by making it simply like diversity and inclusion. But my original intent was only to focus on women. If that is okay, I would like to reword everything in that context. And already Josh and Carolyn, you reviewed it. So I understand those concerns. So I'm also trying to make sure that I reword the questions a bit in a way that it's clear that CNCF is not an employer, rather like an organization where many employers are in there, and then we somehow have to rephrase things and make it clear that there are certain things which CNCF can focus on, but not all the regular problems which the usual employers will take care. So I need to change the questions. I have understood that part. One thing I would like to ask is it okay if I just focus on women and put the questions exactly that way?
I want to start with, I was a little, I think I misunderstood who was asking the survey to be done. I didn't understand your journey and that this was originally an internal survey. And it sounds like you had decided to expand it to try to reach out to a broader audience of CNCF projects and contributors.
Definitely not going to contribute back to the internal survey. I was just saying that, okay, the idea came from there. So now I would like to do something similar under the CNCF scope, if it is possible, if it is okay for you people.
Yeah, I think that whenever we do surveys, it's always important first to understand what we hope to do with it, and are we getting the information we need, and do we have permission to essentially act on behalf of the CNCF, both to do the project, or sorry, the survey, and that we're working with the right people then to implement changes based on the survey. I'm going to say that I think maybe before we look at the survey or anything like that, I think we need to get a better understanding and agreement just around kind of those initial things of if this is something that the CNCF is interested in being attached to, right? Because if we do this through our group, it is kind of something being done on behalf of the CNCF. And I think that influences then any critique of the audience being targeted, and then understanding what are the appropriate groups then to follow through on any recommendations, and who would be making recommendations based off of the survey. I'm gonna shut up now, but I just want to put that out there because I think we should talk about that first as a group before discussing the survey in any depth.
Yeah. My discussion, and I discussed this with Fasila privately, is that particularly given our experience with the developer survey, I feel like we need to have a clear idea of, okay, if we do the survey and we get a bunch of responses, what are we going to do with the data? What's going to happen next? What's the next step? Because, you know, surveys are not a goal in and of themselves. They're a tactic to accomplish a goal. And I'm just not clear on what the goal is.
Okay. So from my perspective, I was planning to apply the design thinking methodology on the survey responses, basically to figure out an empathy map from the stakeholders and then define some problem statements based on the responses. And then see if there is any low-hanging fruits which we can focus on and improve on. So the primary goal was to apply design thinking approach, which is like a research methodology which we are using whenever we do similar surveys. For example, if there are so many women who are responding to the survey in a way like, okay, we do not see enough women in technology, or women stories about women who are succeeding in open source technology roles. If there are more answers that are coming that way, maybe we have to do something to make such women more visible through blog posts and CNCF or similar initiatives. Just an example.
I'm being quiet just because I'm trying to type notes at the same time. One thought I had is that one of the goals that projects have is to have a more diverse set of contributors, I would say, and that is in the realm of like what our group has the ability to act on, essentially, because we do write documents that provide advice and guidance on, you know, recruiting people in general. And then at the moment, we don't actually have very specific information on, you know, what to do if you don't have enough contributors. The problem I'm concerned about is from multiple companies. Another angle, though, is we do not have a diverse set of contributors when we take into account gender. We don't have many women contributors, for example. So this is one thing that we could do, is use the information from this survey to provide more guidance like that. For example, you know, calling out when you do have people who are doing great work and making sure that they're visible in their project and maybe in the wider CNCF community.
For example, CNCF itself is having certain awards which you give in the KubeCons, like top contributors and things. So if there is a way to see if there are more women coming up in those roles, I feel like it will be a good opportunity to bring them forward. Of course, things should be neutral most of the times, but when there are less women who are trying to come up to the forefront, it obviously makes sense to give some more recognition to those people.
I would say that we personally don't have direct influence over that, though we can, if we do something at our group level and we see improvements that could be made, we can suggest it to
of course, only that can
people
be
like
done
that.
with
Yeah.
this survey like this, and then probably we can share that, okay, we found this information, okay, these are the suggestions. It's up to the person who's responsible to do such things, to take it or not take it, but just sharing the information might make a change. That's all.
Yeah, I would say that I want to avoid us doing the survey without from
Okay.
this group, from contributor strategy,
Mhm.
unless we already have concrete things that we know we have control over that we can do beyond just generating a report of the survey, because it may mean that the wrong group is running this survey. So I just want to give you examples of what we could do in the group. And it would be influence around advice to projects about recruiting and keeping contributors. And that's where, though, I think if we did it through our group, we already have surveys that
Mhm.
we are beginning to run, and we would like to run on a regular recurring basis. And we want to avoid putting out too many surveys at once. And this is a concern at the CNCF level, actually. When we put out our survey, they wanted us to make sure that we fit into their survey. There weren't existing surveys that we could have joined up with. And if we want to do the survey, one way to do it would be to incorporate some of the questions into the next survey that we do with contributors. And I wanted to get a feel for if that makes sense to us as a group, because I'm a little worried that just doing the women in CNCF survey, one maybe needs to be run at a different level, not at our group, doing an independent survey like that. And there is survey fatigue,
Yeah.
specifically by women in tech, where I think I've answered a lot of surveys like that. So it's important when we do this that we can also communicate that something actionable will happen as a result of this. I think people are more likely to participate if they trust that we will treat their time with respect and use what they say to do something beyond a report. Does that make sense? I'm just kind of saying that there's a couple different ways we could do this. We could do this through our group. I would strongly recommend then that we take a subset of your questions and do them in the next survey that we do of our contributors, in addition to the one-on-one interviews that you had suggested, which I think could be very valuable as well. And you may get more, a better feel for things that could be changed. Oftentimes it's hard to capture these things in a multiple choice survey.
Yes, got it.
But otherwise, if that's not something you are interested in doing, because I do understand that's asking you to change somewhat of the goal and scope, then you would want to maybe take this to a different group within the CNCF if you want to operate it at the CNCF level, or do it independently.
Perfectly fine. You can let me know whenever you're going to do the next survey, and then we can see if there is a way to incorporate certain things. Yeah.
And Don, Josh, feel free. I don't want to speak for the group on this. I'm just giving you my personal opinion on how best we could collect some of this information and use it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Carolyn. I think trying to do another survey is a little bit problematic, and it probably doesn't belong necessarily under this tag. So I think combining some of these questions into the next survey that we do is probably a better approach, in my opinion. So yeah, I agree with everything Carolyn said.
I don't think we have ever said, because we just did the survey, to be clear, it just went out. It was run, I think, September through mid-November or end of October. I'm a little fuzzy on that. I don't know if we decided on a cadence, if we talked with the CNCF. Josh, did you ever chat with anybody about if we did it again, what would the time frame be?
No. I mean, I would say if we were doing it again, we can't really do it more than once a year.
Okay.
And in between now and the next one, we need to have some deliverables that came out of what we learned from the survey.
100%.
Because otherwise nobody, but speaking from experience, nobody will fill it out the second time. And that was one of my worries with any sort of new surveys, right? Is that people are going to be like, well, you just did a survey. What happened to that one? Because particularly like we were doing an annual survey for Kubernetes contributors. And the first year, a bunch of stuff came out of that survey, but the second year we didn't really follow up on it, which meant that by the third year, response rates dropped by like 60%, because people are like, why should I fill this out if it's not going to have any effect on anything? the
Yeah, I'll echo some of that. I mean, just because we can do more surveys doesn't mean that we should, and being able to actually come in and use the data is, I think, the more appropriate like space to be able to move forward here. And doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be CNCF. Like maybe this is a different like Linux Foundation thing.
Okay.
one of the other things that would be interesting to do is we already have the results of this developer survey. For those who have access to the raw data, I can actually look through and tag some names that appear to be non-male and see if their answers are characterized any differently, which would give us a starting point.
And some people did provide their contact information too, if they were willing to talk with people further about the survey. Obviously, we need to be very careful about who we reach out to from the survey, but you know, because we do plan on doing one-on-ones, both for our survey to target experienced contributors who could become maintainers. We may be able to coordinate between these two and set up a series of one-on-ones with people, make sure that we're asking a good set of questions and just talking to them once, you know. So just because I think we need to do half on this, and I'd really love to move on to the survey we already did. To summarize, it sounds like it would work to, if you want to, we could start incorporating how to recruit a more diverse group of contributors in our next survey, which would be, to be clear, targeted more like towards the end of 2023. And in the meantime, we could ensure that when we do engage with people and do one-on-ones to interview contributors about their experience and come up with better advice for recruiting contributors, that we could also then immediately start to ask questions about, you know, are there specific things as a woman in tech that has made contributing difficult, or, you know, more likely actually, where there were things that made this a better experience for you, so that we can include this in advice or things at this group level, at the tag level.
Sure. I'll also try to do that from my end.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we coordinate so that if you do want to reach out to people, it'd be ideal if we're doing this through this group, that we make sure that we know who's reaching out to whom, so that we don't talk to people multiple times.
Sure.
Okay. So with that, I'd like to move on to the contributor survey results. For this group, I'd really like to focus, you know, the survey was like a pair effort with the CNCF, and some of the questions they asked weren't really part of the original intent of what we wanted to find out. So I want to just focus on data around our original goal for the survey, which is we want to give advice about how to recruit and attract contributors, specifically not new contributors who may be very far away from becoming maintainers, but people who in a shorter, more reasonable time frame could become maintainers on a project and help improve the company diversity across the project's group of maintainers, which is something everyone's keen on doing because it is a requirement as part of being in the CNCF and moving from incubation to graduated. We got 160 responses, 52 were from maintainers, which is great. It was definitely ran the gamut between feedback from new contributors and some who were more experienced. It was definitely not as many experienced developers and contributors than I was hoping to reach in the survey, though. What was useful though is that 4% of the respondents had stopped contributing, which I know sounds like a negative, but that's who we want to hear from. Is for people who this isn't working well for them, we really want to know why, and kind of understand that. Another good thing that we learned about just the group of people who responded to the survey is only 21% of them contribute to Kubernetes. We asked them to list projects out, and I went through and found everybody who contributed to Kubernetes in some way. And a good portion actually are contributing to other CNCF projects. So there was a little concern that maybe this would be heavily skewed. And I think we got a good group of multiple projects that we can actually make some decisions based off of this data. I wanted to share some of the most common project frictions. This isn't really ranked. Some of these maybe didn't come up terribly much, but all of them were more than, say, like 5%. For example, it kind of spanned out in some places. I'd say the biggest one that I heard that seems like the largest blocker for people was time zones. Multiple times people brought up that there's a reliance on synchronous communication. And for this, I'm including Slack, okay, in synchronous, because just to make sure we all are on the same page about that. If we have 3 people talking in a thread in Slack, and they go back and forth for an hour, when someone comes 8 hours later and tries to contribute, they are at a disadvantage in that conversation because they didn't have a chance to respond to people in kind, and conversations may have moved in different directions before they had a chance to really weigh in. Other things that people brought up were that they needed more help than the docs in the project currently provide. I'm trying to phrase that in a less negative way. Some people were like, said very bad things about people's docs, and I don't want to contribute to that mentality. But there's definitely areas I think are gaps between what people hope the docs could do for them and what they were able to get out of just the docs before they had to reach out to people one-on-one and get individual help. Some people said they weren't sure where and how to contribute. And I think that's something that we know how to address. And we've had content in the past that we just maybe need to boost more and make projects aware of. But I do think, at least from that, that's great feedback that we can continue to improve in that area. But at least we know how to improve that part. So that's good. I don't think we need a lot of follow-up investigation in that area. A good chunk of people said that they have trouble actually just getting their their laptop set up so that they can build and test the code. And some people called something out that I personally have seen as well on my own project and other projects, where if their project relies on integrating with like a specific cloud provider, multiple cloud providers, oftentimes contributors don't have a Google Cloud account and an Azure Cloud account and an AWS Cloud, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes it's really difficult, both for the project, some maintainers were calling that out, but also for contributors to be able to develop when, it's an access problem. Which I think is just something maybe I'd like to talk to the CNCF about a bit more, because I know that at some level they can help with that. But I'm not sure at our group level, I don't feel that's very actionable for us, unfortunately. People said that they needed more direct support from the project. When I say project, sometimes that could be other people in Slack. Sometimes that could be reviewers or maintainers, project leads, when they had questions. And then our favorite, not getting timely reviews, or just the turnaround on interactions on reviews is slow. And I feel like a lot of the happiness with people's project and whether or not we got a negative or positive answer on any survey question came down to their interaction with the project. No one ever really said like, oh, they're using insert technology here, and that is a problem, and it became an obstacle for us. Yeah, Josh?
Yeah, so I wanted to jump in on some of these things because one thing that's really interesting from this is that what's in the essay responses and what's in the checkbox responses is different.
Yes, that's a really great point.
So, for example, one of the things that was a surprise to me from the checkbox responses was that when people were checking off what their blockers were, time zones was like in next to last place.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, and I think it actually I don't know what that tells us. I mean, part of it could just be the simple thing of people who aren't having many problems didn't bother to fill out the essay questions.
I also suspect that Pacific time zones and US time zones are probably overrepresented in the survey. So looking at the numbers, it might be.
That is something we can figure out.
Yeah,
Let me
I'd be curious to look at that. Like, you know, how far away are they from Pacific time zone? Because I face this all the time in Slack conversations where I look at the conversation and I'm like, I had some points, but that conversation looks like it's over, so I'm just not going to bother. I get probably a couple of those a day, various channels.
Yeah, I really don't want to ignore some of the long forms just because when they do jive with things that people have told me one-on-one or we've heard, you know, in these meetings when we have people come and talk to us. When I heard the time zone thing, I was like, that has been my experience 100%, and that of many people who aren't that align well with the US time zone. Yeah. Yes, I even if the checkboxes don't back it up, I feel like all of us have experienced that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, you know, I mean, half of us here are dialing in at odd times because we have a time that really works for US. Like you don't usually see a US meeting that's at 10 o'clock at night or someone's 4 a.m. You know, it is during our work hours. Is it okay if I move on, or I really don't want to just talk at people. If you feel like some of the summarization is helpful, I can keep going, but just let me know, maybe.
I just have a quick question on the need more help than the docs provide point.
Mhm.
You don't have to dive into that because I can imagine what some of the feedback might have been, but was there any particular patterns? Was that more coming from the maintainer sort of level, or was it across the board, and were there any sort of key things that they identified were an issue with the doc quality?
I would have to go back and look based on my memory, because it did read all the long form answers, is that I don't believe anyone specifically called out more than just the docs are bad thing. Like that was the level of the answer we were getting. And unfortunately the checkbox result, like the checkbox response that we gave people that they could check again was basically like the docs didn't do it for me, you know, but it wasn't more detailed than that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I feel like a bit there's just this contributors hope that they can get enough information without asking for help from a project. Like that's kind of what they're bringing to the docs. They're bringing to the docs not just, can I find an answer to a specific question, but if I'm trying to contribute and I don't have access to anybody else who knows the project well, can I finish a task or like a issue from start to finish, submit that PR without having to completely stop in my tracks, go on Slack, ask for help, or reach out at a meeting or something like that. And at that point, now you're waiting for some unknown amount of time. And I feel like that waiting, one, ramps up your unhappiness with the docs, not because the docs are bad, but because it forced you to go from I'm potentially being productive and contributing to now I'm very unhappy with how slow it takes to get what is a scarce resource, you know, time from one of the, you know, handful of maintainers on the project. Sometimes I think that that gets reflected back on the docs because the expectation of what the docs would do wasn't just to give information. It was allow them to independently contribute to the project without having to switch to this waiting mode and asking for help.
Yeah.
I've just anecdotally, you know, when people suggested making a tutorial that would walk something from start to finish through doing their first contribution and handled all things they could run into and had a troubleshooting section, for example, people's satisfaction with the docs, at least on my project, went up a lot. And it wasn't because the docs got better, it's because at least their first PR, they were able to do start to finish without talking to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my questions actually. I mean, has there been any thoughts or attempts in the past to even create, you know, short 1-minute videos on each key points of, you know, going through the contribution process? Because a lot of the feedback, and even from some of those I've spoken to who are pretty tech savvy, have still sort of commented that, you know, a lot of documentation is just, you know, very text heavy, and yeah, for those with shorter attention spans, you know, they sort of struggle to make it through all that and connect all those dots. And there's, you know, even just, you know, more diagrammatic ways of explaining the same sort of concepts and things. So
yeah, I'd be more interested in looking at ways to explain it that are not text heavy, but are also not necessarily video. Because I'll say from working on this in Kubernetes, good instructional videos take a really long time to produce.
yeah.
And they're not incrementally editable. In other words, if the video gets out of date, you have to re-record the entire video. You know, because we started doing a lot of that for, you know, for the Kubernetes contributor guide, and realized it was becoming a maintenance nightmare. But I'd be really interested in you know, ways to reach audiences that don't like to sit and read a whole bunch of stuff, you know, huge blocks of text.
Yeah.
That are more maintainable. Yeah, anyway, I wanted to throw in the stat. So by the way, as I've said before in the Slack, I actually have the answers to the survey loaded in a database where I can actually run statistics on it.
Great.
And I've just been looking for, I've been asking the whole group, you know, what do you actually want me to look for? Because I can ask any number of questions, but I don't know what questions are interesting. So in terms of geos, so unfortunately, actually, one of the things that doesn't come in the SurveyMonkey download is what time they filled the survey out, which I was a little surprised by. But we had people self-report what geo they were from. And of the people who completed the survey, 40% North America, 30% Europe, 25% Asia, and 4% everything else.
You said 25% Asia?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we did get a good group of responses. And before, when I was asking my own questions, I particularly looked at the folks from Asia, you know, reporting whether or not they were having particular problems with time zones and stuff. And I was actually surprised at how low they rated that as a set of problems. Now, maybe we're getting self-selection there. That is, people who really had a problem with it already dropped out and didn't fill out the survey. You know, but of the surveyees, like I said, it's like an interesting discrepancy between the people who actually wrote essays versus the people who just checked boxes.
Yeah. I'll have to come up with more questions based off of that. I was finding it difficult in a spreadsheet to come up with percentages. So I may come back to you with more questions so we can look at that better. So let's talk about next steps for what we'd like to do with this survey information. Do we see anything actionable based off of the data we've gotten so far? And are there follow-up questions? So, you know, I'd mentioned that, you know, we did want to do maybe more one-on-one interviews with people to get a better feel on the specific question of getting a diverse group of maintainers from different companies. But are there things that we want to ask when we do engage with people? And is there anything we'd like to do right now, like make recommendations about time zones, things like that, that we could, you know, add to our website right now or include in talks that we do this year? For me personally, obviously, if you read the notes, the synchronous nature of things and that causing friction for people when it comes to, can they become a maintainer if they're always perhaps at a disadvantage compared to people who can attend meetings? That really rung true to me. And I would like to have us include some content about that on the website. Not that it is the biggest pressing problem, but I think it is worth mentioning and encouraging. Oftentimes it is easy to fall back on, we mostly talk in meetings just like this. And I always want to encourage people to talk in documents instead when possible. Is there anything else that people feel that we could act on about this data right now, or follow-up questions we have?
Okay. Well, people, if people think of stuff later on, like, you know, combinations of things that they want to look at, right? Like say, hey, among the European contributors, what did they, you know, how many of them were experiencing this particular friction, etc. Then just drop it in our channel. Because it's pretty easy for me to answer those. I just need to figure out what questions we want to answer. And like I said, for this, the other thing that might be good, somebody has time, we should actually just open an issue about this, is somebody could actually go through the essay responses and clean out identifying information, because that would allow us to actually share those with the whole tag and not just with specific people. Because right now, you know, only the few of us who created the survey were able to look at the essay responses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I can help with that. Because I've already deep dived in once. Obviously, anyone else who has access to the survey, like let's do that. When you say share with the tag, just to like, we could copy and paste it and put it in this meeting note, for example, or do you mean even share wider beyond the tag?
I don't know, we'd share wider beyond the tag,
Okay.
right? If we were sharing wider, it would be very specific quotes that we pulled out of places.
Yeah, because I personally feel that I wouldn't share any long form response that was copy and pasted and not summarized unless I had permission from the person who said it.
Yeah, no, I was just more thinking of giving the entire tag access to the essay responses, so that other people can actually look for information.
I completely misunderstood. Okay, let me summarize that differently. You're saying we could go through, clean it up, make sure there's nothing problematic in the long form, and then let everyone in the tag look at it.
Yeah, nothing that would identify whose response it was, or you know, anything sort of egregious about specific projects. Although one of the things we want to call out for us as a tag is, if people in their essays did respond, did identify specific problems at specific projects, you know, with the caveat that this is one person, that is something that we should probably reach out to those projects about.
Okay, yeah.
Right, because if somebody bothered to fill out essays in a survey to say, hey, you know, the contributor docs on this particular project take you up to, you know, setting up your build environment and then stop. That's something that we can actually take back to that project. and something they would probably want to know about, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the problems with maintainers who've been working on the project since it was founded is there's no way for them to know if their contributor docs have big missing steps.
One
Yeah.
long form answer sticks in my mind when you said that I think someone did give enough information that we could go back to the project and share some of that information with them.
The Alexandra, we had a lot of long form essay questions that people could put anything they wanted into it. And that means that people shared experiences where if you read in the context, you can actually figure out who it is. That's what we're trying to edit. And there's no way that we can prevent that sort of entry from happening without restricting how people can respond.
Wow.
It's just something you do every any survey where you have free form responses. If you want to share the data, you're going to have to go through and edit it by hand. That's how it works every single time.
Yeah, but I was mentioning like for the next one, maybe we have like checkboxes and other forms of the form so that we can share those thoughts and have take a look, and it may be easier to get contributions from ourselves and understand the results. So that's for maybe for the next survey. Digging out some of the reform text and having more, having a way of making that public by default, the results after the survey would be a nice thing to have. There are surveys that we need those long form descriptions and like to get more context, but I don't think that's for at least survey. So maybe.
Yeah, we had checkboxes also. And we have all that data and we've been sharing it in summary form. It's just that in a lot of ways, the essays are actually more valuable because they give people stories and they can go outside of the bounds of what things we thought to create a checkbox for.
Do you know how many of those we have in the long form?
How many of which?
Of the ones that aren't checkboxes and like.
Well, we
would need to.
We had 22 questions, of which I think 4 or 5 were essay questions. So the remainder are checkbox questions.
And how many responses do you have from people? That's in those.
So 81 people completed the survey. One of the interesting things about this particular survey was the 50% completion rate. And I still don't understand what happened because it was specifically people dropped off at page 2. They filled out page 1, which had the first 5 questions on it, and then they stopped. And yeah, I've seen that before, but not at such high rates and not so consistently. And I wish I understood what had happened because that obviously tells us something about, we need to do something about future surveys.
I would say,
And
sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say personally, I was taken by surprise that the survey website recorded a response where you didn't make it to submit. So like maybe 2 of those were mine because I was testing the survey and I was looking at like, oh, we fixed a question, for example. But I know that it would be very easy for someone to start the survey, get a portion of the way through and run out of time or realize there's a second page and be like, I need to do this later. And then that got recorded, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think some of that's awkward because I'm not willing to chalk it up to a glitch on the site. I think that there's a mismatch in how the site behaves and how people act when they suddenly realize the survey is longer than they expected.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, it has to save the answers somewhere.
Yeah.
When you go to page 2, right? Because otherwise that data would be lost.
Yeah. I just mean that,
the,
you know, like I may come back on a laptop then or a different computer or something like that. So some of that just may be that, like, we're just going to see that if it's going to collect
Yeah,
page 1 and 2, other than maybe just not having multiple pages.
yeah. I just felt, I felt like that dropout rate was higher than I'm used to seeing.
Okay.
And that it was weird how consistently it was at the page 2 division and not like anywhere else. Because we actually had 3 pages. Nobody dropped out at page 3. So, you know, you know, maybe I should put a new survey link up and actually look at how, you know, how it kind of feels design-wise, because I almost feel like a bunch of people thought they had completed the survey.
Yeah.
When they hit the thing for page 2, that something about the design led them to believe that was the end of the survey.
Did it have a progress bar on it?
No.
No, we do say at the beginning of the survey that there's 22 questions, but people don't necessarily read that. I don't know if progress bars are a feature that's available with our SurveyMonkey account.
Okay.
Maybe if
That's
you
a good
set
question.
it up backup, share
yeah.
the link around, and we can all take it again and see what it looks like.
I mean, what I've heard from the staff is that even though we may feel like 81 completed surveys was barely enough to give us any data, that's actually better than average for a CNCF survey. Particularly given the number of self-identified maintainers that we got.
Yeah.
One of the other weird statistical things in there is so one of the options that we put under the question of are you a maintainer or not, because we realized that there are weird circumstances in the world of cloud native projects, we offered the option of it's complicated.
Yeah.
And a lot of people chose that option, like a lot more than I was expecting. So like 14% of our people completed the survey chose it's complicated. Which kind of gives me a problem because like when I'm trying to, one of the things I was looking at is, for example, for points of friction that come from within the project, how are things different from maintainers to non-maintainers? With 14% of our people listing is complicated, which bucket do I put them in?
Did we have any other options that because what I'm thinking about it is that the option is complicated, could be used to just maintain the response anonymous, so that it could fill out the survey without having to identify, like.
Do you think people are using it as a decline to answer?
Yeah, it could be.
It's possible.
So if they don't want to be identified or.
Yeah. I was expecting it to be more like 5% to where we could kind of just lump them in with one group or the other and not worry about it. But with it being 14%, it significantly changes the breakdown. Or if we're not doing it by percentages, because we only have 81 people here who can do numbers. So 12 people said it's complicated. 28 people.
I also sort of wonder if people thought that was kind of funny, and so they just checked.
Yeah.
I think it's more than that. A lot of people responded in the what projects do you contribute to? And listed more than one. Most people listed more than one. If you're a maintainer on one and not another, we didn't give them guidance on how to answer that question.
We did
Or
say,
if you're
are you a
no
maintainer?
longer a maintainer for that project, but you're speaking from the experience as a previous maintainer. Again, I wouldn't know how to answer some of these questions. Each
Yeah.
person has to decide, and then we don't have a good way to judge that answer.
Yeah, we did ask specifically, are you a maintainer on any CNCF project?
Yeah,
To say clearly, if they were a maintainer on any project they contribute to, they should click yes. But we didn't say, have you ever been
yeah,
a maintainer? So for people, yeah, probably you're right. For like, say, our 4 people who said they stopped contributing, they may have all checked. I'll need to cross check. They may have all checked it's complicated for that reason. And also the other thing I always have to keep in mind is people don't necessarily closely read the questions.
that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, if you're just
Yeah.
skimming through it, you would probably miss that nudge.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've been kind of lumping in the it's complicated people with the maintainers when I've been doing stats, because I'm assuming if somebody's answering it's complicated, they're at least an established high level contributor, which makes them more like a maintainer than like a casual contributor.
Oh, yeah.
And then that actually makes our audience kind of half and half. If you lump in the it's complicated people with the maintainers, were for people completed the survey, it's about half maintainers and about half non-maintainers.
Yeah.
And so I shared this earlier in a thread on our Slack. And maybe we should share it somewhere else. Is that one of the interesting things that I found was the people who were complaining the most about delays in getting things reviewed were actually the maintainer group.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes, no, the number one friction for people who were non-maintainers was couldn't figure out how to get started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas delays in getting reviewed was number one for maintainers.
I mean, it's hard. If you have not a lot of people in general to review, and you're
Yeah.
one of those reviewers, now you've just removed one person from the pool.
Yes.
Who can review?
And yeah, but I think it's really interesting because, you know, the assumption I've been working with about couldn't get my stuff reviewed was, oh, hey, this is a new contributor who doesn't know how to reach out, who to reach out to.
Yeah.
But it turns out that might not actually be the general case. That in fact it's regular contributors who feel like stuff is taking too long to turn around. And that might not be, it might not even be a different length of time. It might be that new contributors have lower expectations. And so this is the kind of data, you know, particularly I'm interested in the data that runs against what our intuitions were.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's where we get more value out of the survey is things that were not what we expected them to be. Because if everything was what we expected, then we don't need to run a survey.
Hey, Josh, we're at 1 o'clock, and I want to
Okay.
ask, I want people to think about one thing real quick, or maybe take this discussion offline, because there's a timeline coming up, which is, do we want to tag kiosk at KubeCon? Looks like February 6th is the deadline. So maybe after this meeting, we can chat that out either on the mailing list or on Slack.
Yeah, there's a thread on Slack about that already. So I would say
Okay,
just
great.
chime in on that
Yeah.
thread, and that would be super helpful. Because there's some competing discussions in the thread already. So I'd be curious to hear others' perspectives.
Okay. Well, that's our time. You know, I think we're going to just keep talking about this more, you know, offline, and then at our next meeting, mostly to organize our further questions that we can have Josh. I realize now that all of my questions didn't take into account completion rates, so I want to redo all of my numbers you see here. So I'll be following up with questions, Josh.
Yeah, although anything you drew from the essays, any person who did the essays completed the survey.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you can ask me anything. Like I said, this is the raw data, so I'm not going to put a database client available via the web.
Oh, no, I just meant I would
but-
send you some questions.
Yeah. Yeah, just send me questions. It's very easy for me to, just say, for people who said this, how many said that,
Yeah, yeah.
And those are easy to do.
Great.
I'm happy to help with identifying information
Okay.
from the long form answers too.
Okay,
There's a link for anything to drop in there.
Okay. Thanks
Okay.
everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. And we will sync up offline.
thanks.
Thanks, everybody.